probably the closest thing I know to a true Renaissance man. And I see his lovely wife Joyce looking up here smiling at me, but I know you know what I'm talking about. He's had 3 phases in his career that are truly remarkable. The first was at Exxon. As you can tell from the program, and I'm not going to go through this, but he is an absolutely brilliant individual. He achieved the status of senior scientist at Exxon in almost record time, and has had a number of significant inventions. His specialty has always been in drilling and completions technologies with a focus on enhanced oil recovery techniques, and he was visiting with you about one of them today. One of the things he did was, and I can say I was involved in this, so I really appreciate the contributions he made to the industry, that he got the most valuable royalty-generating patent for Exxon in the upstream area. And it had to do with the use of proppants to keep a hydraulic fracture open. And it's the backbone patent, in essence, for the use of proppants in hydraulic fracture. It generated so much money for Exxon that they gave him a special award, an award that it's only been given twice, I was told, and nobody knows what that amount was. Somebody told me one time, if he ever told me, they'd have to kill me, because it's such a confidential award. But he did retire shortly from Exxon after getting that award. To begin his second career. While he was at Exxon, he went to law school at 9. In fact, I went to law school a few years right behind him. He was sort of my mentor in that respect in the path he took. And he also had the dubious distinction when he graduated of being the only person I know that practiced law in the evenings. Exxon agreed to let him practice law with a law firm that he created in the evenings while he was still a senior scientist at Exxon. So you can imagine what that took. I remember asking my general counsel, my boss, how could that happen? And his comment to me really was, well, that's just none of your business. But he did practice law, and then he left Exxon and entered the area of patent law. And this began the second career of this Renaissance individual. He joined my former firm. He was with me for a number of years. And then he joined Baker Botts as a partner over there. He's had his own law firm, as you can see from the brochure. He served as an expert witness in the area of technical expertise. He served as an expert witness in patent law. And he's prosecuted patent applications and others, and he continues to invent to this day. And then his third phase is his new phase that he's starting out now. He's getting into a business with his son-in-law, who is here, Brian. And this is going to be his entrepreneurial phase, where he's going to try to go out and promote some of the technologies that he's personally developed as well. So it is indeed my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Claude Cooke.
Thank you very much, Mark. We do go back a long way, I must admit. Very good to be here in the Metroplex and to learn about this organization. So far as I know, we don't have a comparable organization to this in the Houston area. And it's been my experience that organizations that bring together people from different industries to communicate can be a very powerful force in developing new technology. So I'm sure it's a very productive and worthwhile organization. I want to acknowledge the substantial contributions of Brian Smiley, my business partner, in gathering industry information and in preparing the illustrations that you'll be seeing. We're going to start with a rather amazing bit of data. Last month, the Wall Street Journal sponsored an executive conference in Singapore, and this was not an industry meeting, mind you, it was more probably a group like this. And they were asked, what is the best innovation of recent times? Well, the most popular was social media, 35%, GPS, 23%, iPhone, 21%, and hydraulic fracturing, 15%. When I saw that in the journal a couple of weeks ago, I couldn't believe my eyes. You know, this recognition of oil industry technology has never occurred in this way, in my experience in the industry. So I think the social media being top might indicate something about the demographics of the attendees. I'm pretty sure my generation would not have put that at the top. But it was very interesting to me and very surprising. You might ask, you might wonder whether a huge new source of energy for the world is more important than social media. And that would depend who is asked, what the answer would be. Well, we're going to look now at the background of hydraulic fracturing, some of the history, and how it all began. Because many people think it's a brand new idea. The popular press, in fact, has treated it as such in recent years. It's created a new word, Fracking. Industry never used that word. You won't find it in the industry literature, technical literature, over the history of the technology. But KKR, a private equity firm, recently published a piece that says fracking refers to the entire exploration and production process, including horizontal drilling, fracturing, extraction, and so on. That's the way the press uses it. It's one word that they think of as including the whole process. The technical definition of hydraulic fracturing, however, which we always abbreviated Fracking, pronounced it fracking. If we had more grammarians in the group, I think we would have put an apostrophe in there because it's a contraction of fracturing. But it means forming a crack or fracture in the rock by using hydraulic fluid pressure, injecting fluid at high enough pressure to crack the rock in the earth. The old classical fracturing that we live with most of the history of fracturing, we created a vertical fracture around a vertical well. And the fracture we thought was about a quarter to a half inch wide, 20, 30, 40 feet high, and it could be 500 or 600, 700 feet long, depending on how much fluid we injected and at what pressure. So we had computer models to predict all the pressures and the rock mechanics and so on in vertical fractures. They have a direction depending on the earth stress, an azimuth direction. That's the vertical fracture. But then along came shale fracturing, and it's a much more complex process that we will see. It's complex fracturing of the rock in a network in the shale formation. Well, why do we fracture an oil well? From the very beginning, it's always been economics. It's to increase cash flow, increase production rate. That's what it does. It also has the effect of increasing total reserves, total produced hydrocarbons in many cases. And in many wells, so we couldn't drill the wells if we didn't have hydraulic fracturing to increase the production rate. They just wouldn't produce an economic amount if they could not be fractured. So a very high percentage of wells are hydraulically fractured, vertical or horizontal these days. It's not a new technology. The first well was intentionally hydraulic fractured in 1947. And intentionally is there because people had been fracturing wells before when they drilled them, but they didn't know they were fracturing, didn't think about it, and didn't realize that they could use that process to increase production rate in the well. The first well was intentionally fractured. This is the photograph. It was in the Hugoton field in Kansas. It's interesting to note that that well is still there. It's operated by BP America, and I'm sure it doesn't produce very much. The map on the internet today indicates that it's inactive. But this was the gas unit. What was it? Gas unit number 1 in the Hugoton field. Klepper gas unit number 1, the Hugoton field in Kansas. First well fractured in 1947. I think we should have a monument set up at that well. You know, I propose that to my friends, that we do that, and we invite high government officials to come for the unveiling of that monument. You think we'll get a turnout? I don't know. But it's a historic site. Then the patents by Stanlin engineers in Tulsa were filed in 1948. Two applications filed on the same day by R.F. Ferris and J.B. Clark. These gentlemen have never received any recognition in the industry that I know of. I've heard that Ferris got recognition within his company, but that's the reason I put them on the slide. I think they should deserve some recognition. And the first commercial job was done by Halliburton in 1949 the two jobs were done on the same day. There was two Halliburton senior technical people were vying as to who would go on the first commercial hydraulic fracturing treatment, so they decided to do two on one day. They did one in Texas, one in Oklahoma. And this is the photograph from that job. And it's a fairly small amount of equipment compared with what we'll see later that we use today. So the growth of hydraulic fracturing that we know about today has occurred primarily in recent years. The papers that are published by the Society of Petroleum Engineers, which is the primary technical organization for this part of the industry, grew at a 0.5% compound annual growth rate from the first paper in 1949, published by one of the inventors, to 2002. There was a little bump around 1980. Around 1980, that was massive hydraulic fracturing, that we'll talk a little bit about later. But the big growth has been since 2002. And this is at a 28% growth rate. Last year, there were over 700 papers that discussed hydraulic fracturing. Now, the horsepower has grown also. Horsepower is the amount of power energy used to pump the fluids into a well. It has grown at a 15% growth rate since 2003. These data come from Spears and Associates in Tulsa, and from Richard Spears, and he has data for each individual service company. They show that the large service companies have expanded about threefold or so, but there have been several new entrants into this market in the last few years that have rapidly increased horsepower. So as the end of last year, there were about 18 million hydraulic horsepower in equipment made for performing hydraulic fracturing treatments. Where is the production? Well, it's spread over wide areas of the United States. The basins are shown here in purple. The dark purple is the plays. That's where active exploration and drilling is going on. And I might point out some particular areas. This is the Barnett Shale in the Fort Worth Basin. This area in west, it's the Barnett Shale here. This is the Bakken Shale in North Dakota, very active. The largest shale area, is the Marcellus Shale in the northeast United States. It extends down West Virginia through Pennsylvania, New York State. It goes, it's under the water supply for New York City and New York City, so it's not a friendly location for oil and gas wells there. In fact, New York State banned hydraulic fracturing, but Pennsylvania is doing quite well. They have a lot of wells, a lot of drilling, a lot of income to landowners, and a lot of jobs. So that's the Marcellus. But today, the areas that produce natural gas are not being actively expanded because of the low gas prices. As long as gas is in the $3.54 MCF area, economics of the process that I'll be talking about are not viable. But the areas that are really hot are those that produce liquids, from natural gas or crude oil. And those are the Eagleford in South Texas, very hot area. It looks like a city down there at night with the drilling rigs lighted. And the Bakken in North Dakota. Those are liquid producing areas, and production from North Dakota has expanded tremendously in recent years. So that's where we are in the United States. Now, in the world, the picture is also interesting. These shale deposits are found in many areas of the world. They have not been exploited nearly to the extent that they have in the U.S. But the brown area shows shale gas that we're talking about, and that's brown areas of shale gas. You see the Bakken up in the Marcellus, and so on. There's another type of unconventional hydrocarbons we call tight gas that I'll describe a little bit later. There's a lot of that in the western U.S. And then there's coal bed methane that's also what's called an unconventional hydrocarbon resource. The world has, there have been very interesting exploration in Poland and Eastern Europe. China says they have a lot. There's recently been a discovery in the huge shale deposit in Australia. And so it's a worldwide phenomenon. The only country, or the first country, that has banned hydraulic fracturing was France. In 2011, the French government said, we're going to wait for a better process. Now, I don't know what that's going to be, but they're waiting. And what they don't seem to know, France has had hydraulic fracturing for a long time. I was on a fracturing treatment 35 miles south of Paris in 1985 in the sunflower fields. Most beautiful fracturing job I ever went on. But they've had hydraulic fracturing, but they've banned it right now. Other countries, China particularly, is gearing up and is very interested in it, in this source. So it won't be just a United States phenomenon, but it has been developed up till now primarily in the U.S. Let's talk a little bit about the basics, the geology and the theory, the application of hydraulic fracturing. We need to know a little bit about the geology to know what's going on here. And this is a busy slide, but I'll just point out a few points. Gas or oil accumulate in a trap by gravity movement up through the earth. They come to a trap where it's impermeable, and they're trapped there. So if there's no oil nearby, under it, it's called non-associated gas. There's a trap up here, a seal. Over here, there's an oil reservoir where it's trapped up against a seal, and in a dipping formation, it accumulates the oil. Tight gas can be found down in scattered, very low permeability sand. But the source of all this hydrocarbon is shale. Geochemists have studied shales for years. Geologists knew the shales were there. If the shale has been very hot over geologic time, it tends to produce gas. At lower temperatures, it tends to produce more liquid. But that's the source of the hydrocarbons in conventional oil and gas reservoirs. So what are we doing now? We're drilling the shale. We're robbing the cradle. In a way, we're robbing the cradle. if we would just wait a few million more years, it would accumulate up somewhere, unless it escaped all the way to the surface. If it's not trapped, it would escape to the atmosphere. So that's the big picture on geology. Now let's look at the little picture, the rocks. Gas and oil are always found in rocks. On the left, there's a sandstone with a very high permeability. This is the kind of rock we'd be drilling into around Kilgore, East Texas, in 1930. Very high producibility. Limestone, such as in the Middle East, and then there's shale. Now, there are two important properties of rock: porosity, that's the amount of pore space that can contain fluids, and permeability, it's the conductivity, the ability for fluid to flow through the rock. So we measure that conductivity in the unit called Darcy's, and this would be, for example, 1 Darcy, this 1 Darcy. Shale would be 1/1,000,000th of a Darcy. So it's the matrix of shale is very low permeability. It can be a nanodarcy, very, very low permeability. So these are the kinds of rocks. So we're producing oil from rocks that are 1,000,000 times less permeable than in 50 years ago. Now, the shales outcrop on the surface around Texas, Oklahoma. Many of these shales that are producing here outcrop on the surface. And when you look at them on the surface, as this geologist is, you find a lot of cracks and crevices and joints in the rock. This on the right is a different, another shale. So the question was whether or not these natural cracks exist underground, thousands of feet below the surface. We didn't know that. But we have instruments that can measure, that I'll talk about later, can measure the properties of the rock underneath, and we find that they do. In some rocks, we find in vertical wells, we find one simple fracture, but in some formations, we find very complex fractures or fracture networks. And this is what happens in the area around here, the Barnett Shale. When they're fractured, this kind of fracture network is formed. This is a plan view looking down. The blue lines indicate what are interpreted to be fractures, and we'll talk about how that's done later on. Well, the drilling of these shales went on for a good many years, drilling into them. And George Mitchell, Mitchell Energy, had property up in this area, and they were drilling into these shale wells, very low permeability, drilling vertical wells and fracturing them, and they couldn't produce at an economic rate. The wells could not be made to produce at an economic rate. So they kept trying, until another innovation came along called horizontal drilling and was developed, and then they found that they could make them economic. So George Mitchell and Mitchell Energy are given credit for starting this whole shale revolution right here in this area that's now spreading around the world. We're going to talk a little bit about and look at the fundamentals of fracturing, just to be sure that you understand what's going on during fracturing. This illustrates a vertical well, but we'll transition to the horizontal in a moment. We have fluid, which is now water, here. We have a blender where we can put chemicals into that fluid. We have high pressure pumps. We have a well, and here's the pay zone, the yellow pay zone. We want to pump fluids down that well at such a rate that there will be a pressure at the bottom adequate to create a fracture in the rock, and we keep on pumping until that fracture grows out away from the well in both directions. So we create the fracture this way. And then after we have the fracture created, we add proppant to the frac fluid to make a slurry. The proppant is to ensure that the fracture stays open after we stop pumping. It props the earth apart in the fracture. So then we start adding proppant, whatever it is, into the blender, pump it down the well, extend the fracture, and the different engineers, operators pump different sizes of jobs, but this fracture, as I said, may extend out hundreds of feet from the well in both directions. Now after we stop pumping, shut the well in, pressure drops off, and we then produce back the fracturing fluid, and then hopefully some hydrocarbons. And the production back in vertical wells is not so much fluid, but in horizontal wells it can be a lot of fluid, as we'll see later on. And the fracture fluid comes back, it's gathered in some sort of tank, or it's disposed of one way or the other, and that's the fracturing treatment. Now that's vertical wells. On the right we show a vertical well. Wait a minute. Whoa, wait a minute. Didn't want to do that. On the right we show a vertical well. And this shows a very thick zone in a vertical well. Back in the 1980s, we started what's called massive hydraulic fracturing, primarily in the Rocky Mountain area, where there are many areas, wells drilled into sand that contains gas over 1,500, 2,000 feet vertical. So techniques were developed back then to more effectively drill and produce these kind of wells in vertical wells. But that many shale deposits are not thick enough to get an economic rate. You need to contact more area in the shale. So then the horizontal drilling came along, which produced the shale revolution. And it was based on the fact that we could turn a corner and drill horizontally through the earth. Nobody knew for sure we could do that in 1980. 1985, it was well looking a little more promising. But this technology of drilling through the earth horizontally and steering the bit, there's a lot of technology that's been developed in the last 20, 25 years that we didn't have before, that really had to make this whole thing possible. This fracturing plus the ability to drill these wells that make the shale revolution possible. So this is going to show you a movie now of a vertical well drilling down to a shale. And now we're going to what we call complete the well. We just shot holes in the casing of the well. Now we're pumping the pad fluid to create some fracture, and here comes the proppant and the slurry to create a vertical fracture away from that well. So the fluid is produced back from the fracturing fluid, and then the hydrocarbons. Now we're going to do this same operation in a vertical well in the same shale. We drill down, this may be 1 or 2 miles horizontally, incidentally, it's thousands of feet horizontally normally. Now we can go in and create a multitude of fracturing treatments. We shoot holes in the pipe, we inject fracturing fluid, this is looking at it in cross section, then we inject proppant. We stop pumping in, and we produce back the fluid. That's in one fracturing treatment, Now we can close that one off, plug it off, and do it again. Come up the well. Often they're 300, 400, 500 feet apart, these areas where the casing is perforated. We pump fluid, proppant, and do that. We come up and do another one. Well, in different wells, in different areas, the number of times this is done varies from about 5 to about 40. There are wells where this horizontal has been 2 miles long. People have put 40 fracturing treatments along the horizontal well. So we're stacking frac jobs in a horizontal direction, in a sense, by repeating the process. And then by then we have a lot of fluid in the well. We're going to talk about some volumes later on, but you can see we've done a lot of fracturing treatments. And then we combine production from all of them, and that's how we get really good producing wells. The production will increase after the frac fluid is returned, and this creates some environmental things that we'll be talking about later. I think it's rather amazing, and this technology, it's like steering a rocket. This bit is steered through the shale. Feedback goes to the surface, the data go to the surface, they measure the direction, they log the rock and get the data back to the surface continuously. So the bit is steered to stay within the shale formation as it goes horizontal. And there are people called directional drillers who specialize in doing that and steering that bit. They can change direction, change the angle as it's being drilled. So that's the process that we call shale gas recovery. Now you see equipment going up and down the roads around this area, I suspect. It's heavy, some of the heavy equipment that's used in fracturing treatment is shown here. The frac pumps, normally 2,000, 2,500 horsepower, diesel powered on the back of the truck. There's a blender that blends this is the blender that blends in the chemicals. There's always a data van, and all the data, pressure, temperature, proppant concentration, flow rate, all are collected, digitized, and telecommunicated to anywhere in the world from the data van. So the engineers who formerly in my day were on the job are now sitting in their office and watching the same data that we watched, or they can be. Some typical numbers for this area, and these are numbers from one engineer from one company in this area, in Barnett Shale. Water around 6 million gallons. Sand or proppant about 8 million pounds is pumped down in the well in these multiple treatments. Horsepower around 10,000 around here, because this is relatively shallow, low pressure compared with some areas. Stages 8 to 40. Takes about a week to do the whole operation. It costs from $1.5 million to $3 million. That's part of the total cost of the well, drilling plus fracturing. So you're talking about $8, $9 million wells often when they are completed and ready for production. Here's a frac spread, as it's called, when all the equipment is combined. The pumps here, well heads, and actually this is a pad from which several wells were drilled. There's several well heads here in a line. These wells are drilled down directionally and then off in a horizontal direction from the same pad to decrease the footprint of the drilling and fracturing operation. Water trucks over here, the blenders, the chemical storage,